Bleach, the Thousand-Year Blood War plunges Ichigo Kurosaki into chaos as the Wandenreich, a hidden Quincy empire led by the fearsome Ewok, declares war on Soul Society. The Quincy Sternritter launches a devastating attack, wielding powers that strip Soul Reapers of their Bankais, leaving them defenseless. In a heroic but tragic stand, Captain Yamamoto is overpowered by Ewok, leaving Soul Society in ruins and leaderless. Witnessing the destruction and his friends wounded, Ichigo realizes he must push beyond his limits to face the Quincy. As Part 2 ended on the edge, it foreshadowed an epic showdown yet to come in Part 3 of Bleach, Thousand-Year Blood War. Episode 1 starts off with Uetsu and the rest of Squad Zero except for Senjimaru taking their own lives before he mutters the words. Suddenly, an immense wave of powerful aura erupts from where they are, blinding the Quincy with its brilliance. Senjimaru tells the Quincy warriors to prepare themselves as she activates her Bankai. Boosted by her new power, she got thanks to the Blood Seal oath breaking after the rest of the squad took their lives. Her Bankai, Shatatsu Karagara Shigarami, a beautiful intricate tapestry-like domain, places immense spiritual pressure on its surroundings, which even reaches Ichigo and the others down below the Soul King's palace. Ichigo tells everyone about Squad Zero's extraordinary abilities, which leads to them believing they could perhaps actually manage to defeat the Quincy and Ewok. Ichigo hopes so as well, although the expression he wears on his face is of deep concern. Senjimaru traps each of the Quincy warriors, one after the other, in her elaborate weaves. In complete control of the time and space around her domain, she utters phrases that emphasize the elegance and destructive power of the Bankai of the Soul King's Royal Guard, Shitara Senjimaru. Meanwhile, as Ewok starts walking away from the leader of the Royal Guard, Hyosube Ichibei, thinking he had defeated him. The flames on Ichibei go out as he announces the name of his power, Black, that allows him to take away the powers and identity of anyone painted by his brush. Demonstrating his powers on Ewok, Ichibei takes away his name and identity, taking his powers as a result too. This is the Bankai of the leader of the Royal Guards, Hyosube Ichibei, who then uses his sword brush to give Ewok his new identity and name, Black Ant, rendering the great power of Ewok to that of a lowly ant. I couldn't imagine it. The words Ewok mutter before Ichibei stomps him with his giant leg and crushes him between his massive hands, sending the ruler of the Quincy flying away, finally defeated, it seemed. Falling, Ewok completes his sentence from earlier. I couldn't imagine I could see so much with my eyes closed, as two pupils appear in his eyes, and he transports directly back to Ichibei, striking him with his sword. Ichibei asks him how he was still alive, as the characters he wrote on him begin to dissipate. Ichibei looks on in shock as Jugram, the right-hand man of Ewok, explains that Ewok had been fighting with his eyes closed thus far to keep his power from going berserk. But now that 9 years had elapsed on it, he could finally open them again, regaining his true power, which lends him the ability to see and know everything prior to it happening, making any ability he sees with his eyes practically useless against him. This awakening of Ewok somehow released Ishida from his trap as well. However, Senjimaru appears to have no problem toying around with him as he tries desperately to evade her attacks. Announcing she will put an end to their kind who had been forsaken by the king and had outlived their time, Senjimaru releases a final onslaught on Ishida, capturing him in her weaves once more. Senjimaru takes out a needle. Right before she stabs the back of his neck to take him out once and for all, Ishida tells her he had a reason for fighting. For doing all this, Ewok asks Ichibei that he must be wondering why he's still alive, how his powers peeled away from him and why he is going to lose, and that he must want to know the answer. Ewok's insinuation that he will defeat Ichibei amuses him as he tells the Quincy Lord that, although he knew everything, he seems to have forgotten that all black belonged to him as he plunges the ethereal tower with ink. The whole atmosphere then goes black and white. Ewok gets trapped in the ink at his feet as Ichibei starts chanting a song. The song lyrics and rhythm evoke themes of rebirth, emphasizing the stake of this battle against Ewok, who intended to overthrow the Soul King, and therefore how Ichibei must make sure to stop Ewok once and for all before he could manage that. Once his song ends, Ichibei erects a sea of skulls and graves at his feet, activating Futen Tisatsu Ryo, built from 100 knights stolen from the Soul Society 100 years in the future, that turns the victims' bones, blood, and flesh black, returning them to darkness where even rebirth was not possible. But as Ichibei says the phrase that activates the ability, Ewok stuns Ichibei by saying it at the same time as him, testifying to his ability that could see everything beforehand. Invulnerable to anything and everything his eyes could see, Ewok asks Ichibei, did he still think of him as one without a name? Ichibei leaps towards Ewok, holding out his sword with the intention of impaling him, at which point Ewok proudly declares his name is Ewok, the one who will rob him of everything, as he holds out his hand and pops Ichibei like he was a bearded plum. On the other hand, Ishida starts overflowing with power due to his bond with Yuwatch, as Senjumaru wonders if that was the true power of a stern Ritter, the elite warriors of the Wandenreich led by Yuwak. Senjumaru chuckles at this little display from Ishida, if he thought he would be able to escape from her Bankai with it. But Ishida reveals that it was Senjumaru herself who had been caught in her own Bankai, as she finds herself wrapped in her own weaves. Ishida then draws his arrow, and swearing upon his honor as a Quincy, fires straight through the center of Senjumaru's chest, killing her in the process. This releases her Bankai, which Ichigo and the others sense as well. The Stern Ritter regain their freedom from Senjumaru's Bankai and are united with Yuwak in the next instant at the ethereal platform. Jugrom declares their 1,000 years of prayer were about to be answered at last, as Yuwak walks through his kneeling loyal men, setting his sights on his next target. The Soul King. Using material from the ethereal towers, Yuwak manifests a bridge to the Soul King's palace as he contemplates the end of their 1,000-year-long crusade with the demise of the Soul King. Ichigo and the others finally arrive at the Soul King's palace, wondering if the battle had already been over. They are horrified to see the remains of the Royal Guard's leader, Hyosube Ichibei. But Ichigo then starts hearing Ichibei's voice in his head, asking him to call out his name. Ichigo does so, and suddenly a fresh new Ichibei pops up from his own remains, terrifying everyone. Ichibei explains that thanks to their powers being combined, he was able to restore himself by taking a small fraction of Ichigo's power when he called his name out loud. Ichibei then starts laughing like a deranged old man, while Ichigo wonders about how messed up what he just did was. Ichibei tells Ichigo that he must stop Yuwak before he kills the Soul King and disrupts the balance of the three worlds, leading to their collapse and disappearance. Ichigo responds with a reassuring nod, and they head for the Soul King's tower. However, Yuwak has already reached the Soul King by that time and puts his sword through him. Bidding farewell to him, Yuwatch reveals himself to be the son of the Soul King, ending the episode with a major reveal. Stay connected, like and subscribe for more fun recaps on one and only Endless Recaps. Last time on Bleach 1,000-Year Blood War, The Conflict, Senjumaru channels the powers of her fallen squad Zero Comrades and finds success in trapping the Stern Ritters in her Bankai. However, when Yuwak opens his eyes during his battle with Ichibei, the tide of the battle shifts and the Quincy defeat all the royal guards. Ichigo and the rest of the Soul Reapers finally make it to the palace, but Yuwatch, who had already reached the Soul King by then, impales him. What's to happen to reality in all three worlds as a result of this? And will Ichigo be able to stop Yuwak and the Quincies? Stay tuned to find out in episodes 2 and 3. Having pierced his sword straight through the Soul King, Yuwak asks him if he could hear the screaming within him and the voices of the ones he forsakes, referring to the Soul King's abandonment of the Quincies. Ichigo senses Yuwak's ominous presence at the Soul King's palace as he and the Soul Reapers head to the Soul King. Yuwak's actions create a rippling effect that is felt across the three worlds as tremors, signaling a serious threat was facing the Soul King. As Yuwak vows to put an end to the Soul King for the humiliation he had caused him and his people, Ichigo and the Soul Reapers finally arrive. Thanks to his all-seeing eyes, his true mark of being a Quincy, Yuwak knew beforehand about Ichigo's arrival and also of his intentions to stop him. Eager to see whether Ichigo's dual Zanbakuto in action, Yuwatch challenges him to see who shall remain on top. The two then engage in an epic nail-biting back-and-forth battle. The Quincy King unleashes some of his terrifying attacks during it, while Ichigo, thanks to his training with Squad Zero, doesn't shy away from demonstrating some of his newly acquired abilities. Shattering Yuwatch's Sangsht Zwinger and sending him crashing into the ground with his Jujisho, it looks as if Ichigo had the almighty Quincy King on the ropes. Impressed by Ichigo's training that bore fruit in the form of his glorious new powers, Yuwatch praises him. However, Yuwak then makes the shocking reveal that he had not used his eyes even once during their battle. Announcing the start of the real battle, Yuwatch opens his eyes, unveiling the true extent of his unimaginable powers as an enormous amount of it flows out of him. Using his true power now, Yuwatch unloads a barrage of attacks, which Ichigo is barely able to evade thanks to his Getsugatensho. Ichigo tries but fails to land any blows on Yuwatch, who is able to predict Ichigo's every movement. The power difference between the two becomes very apparent when Yuwatch starts ragdolling Ichigo around. After noticing these tremors, Soifon and the others present in the Soul Society decide to head over to Urahara's research and development lab to ask for answers. Meanwhile, at the lab, Nanao asks Urahara why the Quincies didn't wipe out the Soul Reapers first, if the cause of their war was a result of the conflict between them, which happened 1,000 years ago. So why did the Quincy go straight to the Soul King Edenius and not finish things up with the Soul Reapers first? The reason was that the Soul King knew about the future. He had seen the tragedy that would befall the Quincy with his discerning eyes. But King had overlooked them both times they faced near extinction because they did not fit into the system of the world. Yuak had gone to him first, so he could kill the Soul King, his father, and create a new world. His face painted in his own blood, Ichigo grabs his Zangetsu. Declaring boldly that he will be protecting the three worlds no matter what, Ichigo lunges at Yuach, unleashing a Getsuga Tensho at point blank as Orihime heals him. Unfortunately, that is not enough to pierce through to Yuach, who calmly keeps Ichigo at bay. Meanwhile, Soifon and the others arrive at Urahara's lab, asking questions about the tremors. Urahara tells them they were most likely connected to the safety of the king. Yoruichi surrounds Yuach in her razor-sharp Tenchiheso Hisakukumoi, warning Yuach not to move an inch or risk losing his limbs. Yuach, however, stands utterly unfazed and lights them up into flames, which catch onto a giant curtain behind him that reveals the impaled Soul King. Hoping for a chance to still save him, Ichigo bolts to him and immediately tries taking the sword out. However, because of the Quincy blood running through his veins, Yuak attains complete control over Ichigo through the spiritual pressure in his sword and makes Ichigo slice the king into two, announcing then that he needed someone like Ichigo, who had Quincy, Human, Soul Reaper, Full Bringer, and Hollow powers in them to break the king's seal. Ichigo kneels on the floor, frozen, as Yuak tells him everything he had achieved thus far in his journey through life, including awakening his Soul Reaper powers, was to lead him to this exact moment that he had foreseen. A brilliant light breaks out of the Soul King, followed by terrible earthquakes that are felt all across the three worlds. Suspecting the Soul King had been killed, Urahara and the others fear Armageddon was upon them, as the menacing Quincy King, Yuak, asks the bewildered Ichigo to witness the end of Soul Society with him. Certain something terrible had happened to the Soul King, Ukitake declares he will take the Soul King's place as he takes his robe off, revealing a mysterious black shadow emerging from his back. He then starts chanting something, a prayer his parents used to ask Mimihagi for his health back when he was a child dying of a lung disease. Mimihagi, the local deity of his home of Sakahon, had saved Ukitake from death, although taking custody of his organs in return. As a young boy, Ukitake had started taking classes in the Soul Reaper Academy, although his lung condition persisted. After some years passed, Ukitake, a young man now, dueled against a young Shunsui, who didn't show him any mercy because of his illness. Although the match still ended in a draw, despite Ukitake's poor health with both of their wooden swords breaking. Ukitake then befriends the young Shunsui after being impressed by him during their classes. Although he is not too impressed when Shunsui gave him Monaka sweets that contained alcoholic leaves in them, which he wanted for the children. Some time passes, and Ukitake shows Shunsui the statue of Mimihagi. Seeing it, Shunsui ponders if the rumors of the high-ranking clans had indeed been true. Rumors that some time ago a divine power of the Soul King had detached and fallen to the living world. Shunsui points out that the shape of the statue was a hand, more precisely the left hand of the Soul King, which was responsible for the stillness in the universe that also granted Ukitake life. He had confirmed the rumors of the obscure deity to be true after he heard about Ukitake and finally met him. When the Central 46 tried to appoint a new lieutenant for Ukitake, in case he went down because of his illness, he refuses, stating simply that no one could replace Kain. Ukitake reminds them of their own rule about the responsibility of choosing a lieutenant lying on the squad captain, in this case Ukitake. As they mourn their fallen brother in arms, former head captain Yamato, Shunsui asks for some time alone, while Unohana bids farewell to Ukitake. Back at the present time, and the shadow suddenly balloons in size, taking the form of a giant eye as Ukitake performs the Kamikake ritual, a ritual that expanded the power of Mimihagi attached to Ukitake's lungs throughout his body. By giving all of his organs to Mimihagi, Ukitake had become its embodiment, representing the right hand of the Soul King himself. Ukitake had always been ready to sacrifice his life for this moment. Having anticipated it and thus performing Kamikake, the gallant, white-haired hero was ready to lay down his life for the one who had once given him the opportunity to live it. With flashbacks of their times together jumbling up in her head, Kuchiki calls out to her dear superior officer. But Ukitake, wanting her to stay strong in this difficult situation, reminds her about the two types of battles as the shadow grows stronger, inflicting even more damage to Ukitake. Meanwhile, Shunsui, thinking about the two battles, which were to either protect life or to defend honor, decides to take on the former one as he stands inside the prison cell holding the notorious Aizen Sosuke. The Soul King existed to stabilize the Soul Society, through which a great number of souls passed. Now with him gone, the Soul Society, along with the Precipice World, Hueco Mundo, and the world of the living will all soon cease to exist. Yuach pits the blame for this on Ichigo, sending him into a confused state of shock as he felt overwhelmed with guilt over what he had just done. On the other hand, Shihoin and the rest of the Soul Reapers launch a diversion attack on Yuach to keep him occupied, while Orihime tries to heal the Soul King using her powers. She fails to heal him as Yuach thwarts the Soul Reaper's coordinated attack on him like they were flies. Amused by their desperate attempt, Yuach tells them no mere mortal could possibly resurrect the Soul King. Meanwhile, the Mimihage deity channeling through Ukitake manages to reach the Soul King and stabilizes him. Even Yuach is shocked by this dark, shadowy figure that he didn't foresee. Shino asks Urahara how much longer Ukitake could remain as a stand-in for the Soul King, since the connection was probably going to break once he dies. Urahara didn't have the faintest idea regarding that, since this was his first time ever seeing something like this. However, it was imperative they find a way to stabilize the Soul King before this connection ended. Meanwhile, down in the dungeon where Aizen was being held prisoner, Shunsui enters and unlocks one of the many seals that had been placed on Aizen to seal away various parts of his person. Only unlocking his mouth, Shunsui is stunned when Aizen walks out to him just from that. Granted permission to free 3 of his seals, Shunsui unlocks Aizen's left eye and ankle as well. Shunsui proposes Aizen a deal where he would have him breathe the fresh air of Soul Society again in return for his cooperation in defeating Yuach and the Quincy's. When suddenly one of the guards rushes Aizen in order to properly restrain him and gets his arms blown up from his immense spiritual pressure. Aizen then tells Shunsui he had no interest in breathing the air of the Soul Society about to be crushed by Yuach. Stay connected, like and subscribe for more fun recaps on one and only Endless Recaps. Last time on Bleach 1000 Year Blood War, the conflict, Ukitake, having lived on through the powers of the right arm of the Soul King, Mimihage, nobly sacrifices himself in an attempt to stabilize the Soul King. Meanwhile, Shunsui goes over to Aizen and asks him to join forces with them in order to stop Yuach and his Quincy forces. However, Aizen expresses no concern regarding what happens to the 3 worlds. How long will Ukitake manage to hold this temporary stabilization? And will Ichigo and the others manage to stop Yuach from finishing off the Soul King? Find out in episode 4. The episode starts off with Ukitake's body barely holding on as Mimihage rushes out of him and rushes towards the dying Soul King. Everyone at the Research and Development Lab is deeply sorrowed by what is happening to Ukitake, but steadily yet surely, the tremors come to a pause. On the other side, at the Soul King's palace, his right arm, Mimihage, envelops the Soul King while Yuach looks on, stunned by a dark, shadowy apparition even his foreseeing eyes didn't predict. Yuach realizes quickly why that was the case, as his eyes not predicting the future of something could only mean it belonged to the Soul King himself. It puzzles Yuach that the Soul King, who was capable of seeing all, would be using his right arm to stand in his way. So he concludes it must not have his will in it. Yuach decides to eliminate this right arm as well when Ichigo suddenly breaks free from Yuach's control and wedges himself between the two. Yorichi realizes that the black, shadowy arm was stabilizing the Soul King, and so she quickly puts up a barrier around it to protect it. Desperately trying to fend off Yuach, Ichigo tells him he would stop him and protect everyone, no matter what. Yuach challenges Ichigo's mindset for being weak, and one that couldn't possibly hope to accomplish what Ichigo planned to by calling him out for still not using the word kill against him, suggesting he had no intention of killing Yuach, who was not only threatening to end the world but was also his mother's murderer. This messes with Ichigo's head, whose confidence takes a major blow as he is left rethinking his entire strategy. That's when Yorichi gets struck by a blue, spiritual power-based arrow in her back that breaks her sealing of the Soul King. It's Ishida. Seeing him catches Ichigo off guard, and Yuach starts approaching the Soul King once more. Ichigo tries to stop him again, but now with his conviction in a blur, Yuach throws him to one side the next second. Yorichi throws silver balls at Yuach that mark their target on the first hit and disintegrate them upon the next. But before she is able to deliver round 2, Perinchus, one of the Stein Ritters, tears up her entire arm with ease. Yuach then swipes at her, sending her falling down from the platform. As Yuach starts tearing apart Yorichi's barrier, Ichigo tries to stop him again, but Ishida's arrow had other plans. Ichigo snaps at Ishida, demanding an explanation for what he was doing right this instant, while Ishida maintains an indifferent attitude, only concerned with stopping anyone in Yuach's way, even if it were his best friend. Ichigo desperately tries to remind Ishida that not standing in Yuach's way meant the destruction of the 3 worlds. Ishida continues his indifferent attitude, stating he was well aware of his actions, but nothing mattered more to him than the duties that fell upon him as a Quincy, which really stings Ichigo, as if apparent by the obvious disappointment in his face. Meanwhile, the rest of the Stern Ritters show up as well. The 2 friends turned enemies, then go off in an epic battle, pitting the powers of a great Soul Reaper and a great Quincy on full display. Ishida gets caught off guard after he notices similar glowing blue lines across Ichigo's that were only seen on a Quincy, reminding him for a moment that the man he was trying to stop was more like him than he thought. And Ichigo wastes no time in taking advantage of this slip-up, as he grabs a firm hold of Ishida's collar. Still not giving up on his friend of several years, Ichigo tries to wake Ishida up from all this once more, when Ishida unleashes his powers, blowing Ichigo off him, donning new fantastic powers called the Quincy Vol Stern Ditch. Back at the Research and Development Lab, Urahara shows concern about finding a way to stabilize the king since Ukitake wasn't looking like he could hold on for too long. Ishida unleashes the full extent of his new powers on Ichigo, attacking him with hundreds of arrows simultaneously at terrifying speeds. While Ichigo does manage to evade his attacks, it looks as if Ishida had Ichigo on the ropes. At the same time, Ganju, Orihime, and Sato put up resistance against the Stern Ritter, giving it their best. However, it is far too insufficient, as the Quincy warriors remain unfazed as though they were being attacked by feathers. Gerard takes the responsibility of dispatching the measly Soul Reapers in front of him all by himself. Ganju fires a hail of firework bombs at them, but Gerard thwarts them off with just a single swing. His next swing is aimed at Ganju, but Orihime blocks the deadly blast just in the nick of time. From right behind her, Sato charges his mighty fist and lets loose a massive hit on them all, but astonishingly, they remain completely unfazed. As the Stern Ritters start getting overconfident, Ganju pulls off his final move, Renkin Seppasen, which creates a massive sinkhole right through the celestial platform, taking the 4 Quincy elite alongside it. But they shoot out of it the very next second, as it appears nothing they do would harm even a hair on their heads at this point. Having learnt about the 1,000-year war between the Quincies and the Soul Reapers had only confirmed it even more for Ishida that there was no common ground to be found between the two races. And at the end of the day, it was always Quincy blood that was needlessly spilt. Ukitake's state starts worsening, as Ewok starts removing the hold of Mimihagi from the Soul King. His suffering being too much to bear, Azane tries to save him from any further anguish when her younger sister and most devoted subordinate of Ukitake, Kiyone, with a heavy heart, grabs a hold of her hand, motioning her not to do anything of the sort. Going up against his closest friend, Ishida had shown Ichigo his resolve. Demanding they settle it right now, Ishida challenges Ichigo to show him his conviction as well in what he was fighting for. What follows is a glorious clash between Getsuga Jujiso and Sternenstab, resulting in both attacks disintegrating the other. Ishida makes it clear to Ichigo he was not going to allow him or anyone else to come between Ewok's plan. Burdened by the overwhelming pressure of it all, Ichigo stands still for a moment, as though inviting Ishida to attack him, and then suddenly, with a wave of his arms, he begins to release another attack on Ishida. However, striking first, Ishida fires a lightning-fast arrow that blasts off a major portion of Ichigo's torso on the right. Struck by the same man who had previously risked his life for him, Ichigo starts slowly falling down, in a state of disbelief at what Ishida had just done. This cold-blooded backstabbing from Ishida against his own comrades gets recognized by Gerard, who formally welcomes the new Quincy warrior into their ranks. In the final scene, Ewok finally manages to completely rid the Soul King of Mimihagi. Ewok, who is now more powerful than the Soul King, forms a sword made from the spiritual energy of his loyal servants, and slices the Soul King out of his capsule. Announcing he would restore the world to the way it was meant to be, Ewok starts absorbing the Soul King's powers. Blinding blue lights emerge during the process, as Ewok finally completes the transfer, unveiling a set of several hellish eyes in his newly transformed state that was equipped with the almighty powers of the Soul King in addition to his own, at which point the episode comes to an end. Stay connected, like and subscribe for more fun recaps on one and only Endless Recaps. Last time on Bleach 1,000-Year Blood War: The Conflict, friends turned foes, Ichigo and Ishida face off as Ishida tries to stop Ichigo from getting in Ewok's way. Donning a new transformation, Ishida confirms once and for all where his loyalty lies by taking out Ichigo as Ewok successfully removes Mimihagi from the Soul King and absorbs his powers. Is it over for Ichigo and everyone else? Or will fate somehow favor the Soul Reapers? Let's find out in episode 5. The episode starts off with a massive flood of some sort of black matter emerging from the Soul Shield membrane into the Seirete. In an attempt to keep the Research and Development Lab safe, Shuhei, Ikaku, and Yumichika put up resistance against the enormous swarm of what appears to be tiny leech-like creatures. Meanwhile, Byakuya, using his Senbonzakura, exquisitely clears through scores of the tiny devilish creatures. However, their numbers just don't seem to quiet down, as tons more of them gather into a colossal wave that did not seem like it would go down easy when suddenly they all get crushed like grapes. It was Aizen's doing. Using his incredibly strong spiritual pressure, he swiftly solves the problem like a boss. Seeing Aizen out like this, The rest express serious opposition against this decision by Kyoraku. However, Kyoraku quickly reminds them of the situation in which they were in, with the world on the brink of ending. Using evil in order to defeat evil was not an evil act if it meant the world could be saved by it. Aizen asks Kyoraku to free him, so he could effectively get rid of the eyeball creatures now that they had become allies for the moment. But Kyoraku doesn't fall for it, knowing Aizen didn't need to be released to be able to take care of these things. And that's exactly what happens next. Aizen then uses Kurohitsuki to try and break free. But despite his impressive technique, which he showcased without even saying the incantation, Aizen isn't able to break free from his confinement. Aizen theorizes that the eyeball creatures were probably remnants of Yuok's power that poured out while he was trying to absorb the Soul King's powers. And it will take a little while before he is able to completely make them his own. Offering to eliminate the problem of getting to the Soul Palace, Aizen tries to shoot down the Soul Palace, but his powers suddenly disappear. The chair Aizen sat on had the ability to restrain his spiritual pressure around his body, and quite effectively at that. Kurotsuchi, the inventor of the contraption, then shows up, boasting that no matter how powerful Aizen was, he was not going to overpower his machine. Aizen then challenges Kurotsuchi to test whether his powers or his invention are superior, when all of a sudden he gets struck by a bolt of bright yellow spiritual energy. It's Najakup and the Forsaken Quincy's, here to prevent the Soul Reapers from shooting down the Soul Palace while Yuok was still in there. Kyoraku tells Urahara to quickly open the gate to the Soul Palace. He then asks Najakup if he was here to help them by any chance, to which Najakup replies with a stern no. Having already known things weren't going to be that convenient, Kyoraku places his hand on his Zanpakuto, ready to engage in battle, but before he could do anything, Najakup abruptly gets impaled right through the chest from the back by Bazard. Bazard and the rest of the Quincy's offer to join forces with the Soul Reapers to try and take the Quincy King down, but on the condition of a ceasefire, and that they be taken alongside them to the royal palace so they could kill Yewatch themselves for abandoning them. Kyoraku then addresses the entirety of Seirete, calling on all of them to gather around the Lab of Research and Development, requesting they donate some of their spiritual energy as the gate to the Soul Palace required a considerable amount of spiritual energy to open. Battered and bruised, but their spirits still not defeated, the Soul Reapers pick themselves up as they make their way over to the Department of Research and Development. Kenpachi then appears and starts asking about the whereabouts of his lieutenant and dear friend Yachiru. Learning there was still no sign of her, despite the search efforts by the Soul Reapers, Kenpachi decides to take matters into his own hands. However, he finds Nanao blocking his path, requesting he have faith in his comrades and instead make himself useful by going over to the R&D department to donate his spiritual energy, which was desperately needed right now to build the gate. Uncharacteristically, Kenpachi agrees with Nanao's reasoning and heads over to the R&D department. Taking center stage at the very top, Kyoraku addresses everyone present there. With the Soul Society, living in the precipice world, basically all of reality on the verge of collapsing, Kyoraku asks everyone there to forget their past grudges and grievances for the moment, urging them to instead focus their everything into stopping Yewatch. The brave captain's powerful words resonate deeply with the audience. The plan was to build the gate, open it here, and storm the Soul Palace. Hiyori, carrying a giant water spout, makes an entrance. Shinji doesn't hesitate to express his shock over seeing her there, to which Hiyori gets mad since she had been busy doing his errands all this time. As soon as the two stop bickering like little kids, Hiyori starts pouring out the content of the water spout. A clear liquid that didn't wet anyone who made contact with it. Urahara explains that it was made from the distortion between the three worlds and was the source of the energy they'll need to head into the royal palace. As soon as Hiyori is done pouring it, Urahara asks Love and the others to go to the autopsy room and put on their shihakusho, the black outfit that the Soul Reapers wore, and return back here. Love throws Hiyori over his shoulders like a bag, and they all go over to change. Meanwhile, Aizen starts moving again after the immobilizing effects of Najakup start to wear off. He tells Kyoraku he wouldn't get a better chance to kill him than this. Kyoraku replies he would have done so if he could ages ago, attesting to the formidability of the former squad captain. Kyoraku expresses pity for Najakup, who, despite landing a clean strike, was only able to immobilize Aizen for a mere 5 minutes. Kyoraku then proceeds to leave for the R&D department and tells Aizen to chill, basically until the gate is ready. Sparks fly as the gate starts to form. But before going in, Urahara warns everyone about the possibility of no return once they enter. Soifon throws his words back at him for assuming something as little as that would discourage the honorable 13 court guard squads. Kenpachi, in total Kenpachi fashion, complains about hurrying up and going inside already, so he could crush the enemy. As the lot prepare to enter, Observing the odd spectacle of the Soul Reapers and the Quincy's joining forces to fight a common threat, Aizen found it amusingly ironic that Ichigo, the man who tried so hard to stop him from entering the royal palace, was now there. Around the same time, back at the royal palace, Ichigo regains consciousness and is back to normal again. The reason behind it was Inoue, who had been tirelessly healing them all this time, even through the mighty roars of her empty stomach. Now with everyone all healed, she could finally rest. Ichigo then confirms their worst fears. Ishida really had turned over to the wrong side. Inoue then tells Ichigo of Kan's heroics, as he had inflated himself up, which prevented Ichigo's fall. Ichigo leads the prayer for the deceased, as if Kan had died, and Kan quickly gets up to give Ichigo a piece of his mind. Expecting an argument, Kan gets surprised when Ichigo offers him his thanks for saving him. Back to business, Yoruichi figures it won't be long till the space around them starts collapsing, as it had already been a while since Ewok had absorbed the Soul King's powers. Ichigo agrees with her on this, although he is puzzled by how they were going to manage getting back up there without getting noticed by Ewok or any of his loyal servants. Yoruichi tells Ichigo not to worry about that, as all of a sudden, the space in front of her starts distorting and opening up only to reveal Grimmjow. Stay connected, like and subscribe for more fun recaps on one and only Endless Recaps. Last time on Bleach 1000-Year Blood War, The Conflict, Kyoraku reveals his plan of joining forces with Aizen in order to defeat Ewok. While there's opposition, wasting such a powerful aid wasn't an option anymore. Everyone then heads towards the R&D department to provide spiritual pressure so that a gate could be opened to the Soul Palace. Meanwhile, after regaining consciousness, Ichigo is stunned as Grimmjow appears at the Soul Palace. What's Yoruichi's real plan, and will Urahara and the others successfully open the gate? Let's find out in episode 6. The episode starts off with the Soul Reapers, the Quincy's, and everyone present in the Seirete presenting their spiritual pressure through orbs for the creation of the gate to the Soul Palace. However, all of a sudden, the rubble from the Wandenreich city starts rising up, being summoned by Ewok to the Soul Palace. Urahara realizes they didn't have much time and had to finish the gate quickly before things got too out of hand. Meanwhile, back at the Soul Palace, Ichigo and Grimmjow greet each other in their own way. Although their conversation gets cut short by Nell, who pounces on Ichigo after seeing him again after so long. As she tells Ichigo that she could now control shifting from her child to adult form, thanks to Urahara's new invention, Orihime stares daggers at the Arankar in front of her, oblivious that she was no more than a homewrecker to Orihime. Chad tries to defuse the situation a little while Grimmjow and Nell get into a little argument over who called the shots now that their ranking, set by Aizen, was no longer relevant. That's when a high voice from behind a box cuts them off, revealing Riruka, followed by Yukio as well. They all then head inside Riruka's box to fill Ichigo in on the plan, which apparently only he wasn't aware of, as Chad and Orihime had already been told by Urahara. Yoruichi explains that in the space existing between the Soul Society and the real world, the Precipice World, existed the Valley of Screams, which due to its different reishi space, which it had as a result of its different reishi structure, helped Urahara locate Riruka and Yukio. Now, using Riruka's box-forming ability and Yukio's dimension manipulation, they had trapped a small portion of the Valley of Screams inside this room, and were planning to use it to travel to the Soul Palace without having their spiritual pressure noticed, and thus mount a surprise attack on Ewok and the Quincy's. Back at the Seirete, the gate fails to form due to lack of spiritual pressure. Ukitake's absence was having a real toll on them. However, here to save the day is Kurotsuchi, who brings out his spiritual pressure amplifier, and the gate starts forming again. While Yoruichi further elaborates on their plan and tells Ichigo that they will head right where the Soul King was using a nail she had planted earlier, and if the Quincy's are still there, this will enable them to launch a surprise attack where Ichigo will use his strongest Getsuga on Ewok. In the meantime, everyone else would fend off the Quincy royal guards. Ichigo then asks Grimmjow why he was helping them, to which he replies, where would he kill him if Ewok destroyed Hueco Mundo? Around the same time, at the Soul King's palace, Ewok's new powers terrify even his own royal guards, as he provides a little demonstration by destroying the entire palace in an instant. Ewok then uses his newly acquired powers to rebuild their lost nation, using the immense reishi present in the surroundings. On their way to where the Quincy's were, Yukio announces that he won't be leaving the box as he wasn't obligated to risk his life since he was forced into this. Ganju gets into an argument with him over it, but Ichigo stops him and tells Yukio he had no problem with that. Moreover, Ichigo also tells Riruka to stay here, as her powers weren't suited against their enemies, and he would much rather they be safe, as they were their only way of getting away. Simultaneously, the gate to the Soul Palace is finally ready. Both parties then enter the Soul King's domain, although they get shocked when they find the Wandenreich cityscape all around. Yoruichi wonders if they had perhaps arrived at a wrong location when she finds the nail she had left by the Soul King there, confirming it was the right place. Yuak had completely remodeled the Soul Palace into a Quincy town in the matter of minutes, attesting to how incredible his powers had now become. Yushiro, the younger brother of Yoruichi, senses her spiritual pressure in the distance and starts to quickly head over to where she was. However, unable to make a foothold, he begins to plummet into the nothingness beneath, before getting caught by Renji at the last second. Byakuya speculates that the reason behind them not being able to make use of the abundant reishi present in the Soul Palace was because the enemy had control of it, which was not hard for someone who was capable of killing the Soul King. Soifan also chimes in regarding the absence of the Soul King's presence, fearing the worst. Cool as always, Kiraku quickly rationalizes that even if the Soul King was dead, he could still sense Ichigo and the others, which meant that not all hope was yet lost. Offering some words of encouragement, Kyoraku quickly boosts the morale of his party so they could do the task at hand. All of a sudden, an enormous castle erects from the ground, making it clear that Yuak and his forces were not shy to take on anyone who opposed them. Considering the castle a foundation of the new world, Yuak names it Warwelt. Jugram pledges to eliminate every single one of the enemy intruders that had appeared around Warwelt so that the future Yuak had seen through his eyes could be realized. Episode 7 begins with Yewatch ordering his royal guards to go show the intruders a nice welcome for trespassing on their sacred War Welt. Unable to wait any longer, when the enemy was practically welcoming them into their stronghold, the Soul Reapers decide to make their move, while the estranged Quincy's part ways at that point, stating they had no reason to work together or follow orders from the Soul Reapers anymore now that they were here. Ichigo's group, sensing the Soul Reapers heading towards the castle, also decides to follow suit. Urahara notices Kurotsuchi was not among them, while at a different point in the royal palace, the gate opens again, revealing Kurotsuchi and Nemu coming out of it. Kurotsuchi had intentionally gone after everyone else to ensure he could test his experiments without any interference. However, he forgot to factor in one variable into his great plan: Kenpachi Zaraki, the captain of the 11th squad, who wasn't with the first group as he was using the toilet. Unfortunately, poor Yamada had also gone to the washroom around the same time and now was stuck with them. Kurotsuchi and Kenpachi butt heads for a brief moment before Kenpachi takes off with Yumichika and Ikkaku, with Yamada following behind as well, while Kurotsuchi and Nemu go their own way. Unable to get in contact with the others because of the strange reishi, Chad points out that since they were after the same enemy, they were bound to meet each other eventually. While Grimjaw believes that greater numbers meant less mobility and darts ahead after spotting Naklavar, Grimjaw pounces on him, landing a massive blow that crumbles the building he stood on instantly. Meanwhile, Valkyrie announces out loud to all Soul Reapers to come take him on at the same time, while Bazard and the rest plan to settle it their own way with Ewok, and especially Jugram. Naklavar, undamaged by Grimjaw's attack, takes off like a little cockroach running away from an impending slipper. Grimjaw runs after him, asking him to stop and fight. Naklavar offers to join forces with Grimjaw as they were both enemies of Ichigo, but Grimjaw refuses, and the two continue their little cat-and-mouse chase. Naklavar then throws a strange-looking orb at Grimjaw, calling it a gift, which Grimjaw immediately slices in half with his claws. However, he suddenly falls down paralyzed all of a sudden, as Naklavar confesses that the gift was actually poison, reminding Grimjaw to never take anything from strangers. Barrow takes aim at the Soul Reapers below with his sniper while being hidden away in a tower. Targeting those who were more isolated from the rest, he takes his first hit at Hisagi, followed by Umaeda, Kiyone, and finally Isane. Kyoraku orders everyone to keep advancing. As he's trying to get out of plain sight, Renji gets attacked by familiar-looking arrows all of a sudden. Everyone then immediately recognizes the spiritual pressure belonging to them. It was Ishida. Ishida tells Renji that the age of the Soul Reapers was now over, and a new age was beginning from this very Warwelt, led by Ewok. Renji asks Ishida if he met with Ichigo earlier, to which he replies that he killed him, or so he thought, as he ended up surviving. Having gotten his answer, Renji takes on Ishida, planning to go after the castle and Ewok right after. Releasing his new and improved Bankai from the get-go, Soo Zabimaru, Renji demonstrates his conviction. He shoots Zabimaru at Ishida, blazing red hot, and destroys multiple buildings behind Ishida in the process. Ishida dodges narrowly and jumps into the air to launch Lich Regen on him. Using the defensive characteristics of Hihio, Renji blocks the downpour of arrows on him. Renji then retaliates by grabbing Ishida, throwing him down, and holding him there to hit him with Zagatepo. But to Renji's surprise, Ishida remains unfazed and quickly rises up as he finally decides to tap into his new powers as well. Ishida then turns the tables on Renji as he displays his new deadly powers, but Renji manages to subdue him using He Tensho. Renji then tells Ishida he'll need just 20 seconds to settle this as he recalls his training with Ichibei, where he learned to keep adding his spiritual pressure into Zabimaru for at least 20 seconds. Having perfected it now, Renji brings down the chaotic wrath of Zagaizeko, a spinning ball of flames, onto Ishida. Meanwhile, Kurotsuchi and Kenpachi notice the ongoing battle between Ishida and Renji as it reaches its climax. Kurotsuchi is unimpressed by the display of unintelligible spiritual pressure use, although he understands why Kenpachi would be impressed, since that was exactly what he did as well. Around the same time, Naklavar tells Grimjaw he wouldn't have ended up like this had he listened and joined forces with him. But before Naklavar can bring down the final blow on him, Ichigo drops in. Renji approaches Ishida, who is lying at the center of the massive crater left by Zagaizeko, when all of a sudden Ishida starts collecting reishi from the surroundings and quickly heals completely as though nothing happened. Considering Renji's hesitation to finish him off, what'll lead to his defeat, Ishida brings forth Fetterswinger on Renji, a technique that can extract the spiritual pressure of anything within its confinement. Ishida drains Renji out of his spiritual pressure, rendering him unable to use his Bankai again. However, unwilling to admit defeat, Renji calls upon Soozabimaru and releases Hikatsu Taiho in a last-ditch effort to take out Ishida. But Ishida slices through Renji's final attack and finally takes out the unyielding Soul Reaper as he drops down on the ground. Ishida then states the 3 reasons why Renji lost. Firstly, he was subconsciously trying not to kill him. Secondly, he didn't know his powers. And thirdly, and most importantly, he was a Soul Reaper that he despised. Stay connected, like and subscribe for more fun recaps on one and only Endless Recaps. Last time on Bleach, 1000-Year Blood War, the Quincy's launched their attack on the Soul Reapers. While Naklavar and Grimjaw engage in a cat-and-mouse chase, Barrow wreaks havoc upon the Soul Reapers with his deadly sniping. Amidst this, Renji comes across Ishida. The two are evenly matched up to a point until Ishida brings forth his new powers and decides the battle with an arrow through Renji's chest. Is there really no hope of redemption left from Ishida? Let's find out in Episode 8. Episode 8 begins with Ishida standing over a fallen Renji as Barrow peers on from afar. Meanwhile, Kenpachi and Kurotsuchi's group come across Pernita Parnchas. Kenpachi wonders about the nature of the peculiar being in front of him and rushes him the very next second. Kurotsuchi tries to stop him, but by that point, Kenpachi had already jumped back. He was able to successfully land a blow on its head while suffering an injury to his right arm. Pernita then suddenly starts morphing and lets out whip-like protrusions from his body, leaving the two captains completely puzzled about what's happening. As they look on at the weirdly shaped Pernita, Kenpachi's injured arm starts twisting out of control all of a sudden. Kenpachi pulls his own arm off, and the infected arm continues to twist until it eventually bursts into a puddle of blood. Kurotsuchi praises Kenpachi's quick thinking, all the while making snarky comments as well, and asks Nemu to treat his injury. He then advises Kenpachi to refrain from taking the enemy head-on, but like talking to a wall, his words have no effect on him as he engages the mysterious enemy again. Kenpachi lands a blow on Pernita's head when abruptly his entire body starts cramping up like his arm before. Kurotsuchi impales him with his sword then, letting out the paralyzing scream of Ashisogijizo at fear level 4 for 4 seconds to completely paralyze Kenpachi. Kurotsuchi then deduces from the fact that Kenpachi remained immobile after he had paralyzed his body that Pernita's powers had something to do with controlling their enemy's nerves. Ikaku and Yumichika aren't surprised by Kurotsuchi's self-serving behavior as they taunt Nemu about her captain still being the same. Quincy's had the ability to convert the reishi in their surroundings by running it through their veins, so it doesn't surprise Kurotsuchi if one had the ability to control other parts using it as well. Kurotsuchi taunts Pernita by telling him now that he knows his powers, he has nothing to fear to incite an attack from him. He then throws acid on his nerves to put him into excruciating pain. Kurotsuchi then walks up to Kenpachi and justifies his actions by saying his sacrifice is necessary for them, as noble sacrifices lead to noble victories. Kenpachi stares at him, still able to move his eye. Kurotsuchi thanks Kenpachi for letting him learn about their enemy's powers, as well as letting him know his Ashisojizo wasn't strong enough yet, and needed improving for the next time he would have to use it on him. He then faces Pernita and tells him to offer himself up as his test subject, since their beloved captain had sacrificed so much already. Kurotsuchi's crude words infuriate Pernita as he suddenly starts morphing again, only to reveal a giant hand with a dual pupil eye in its center. It was the Soul King's left arm. Kurotsuchi verifies this, as its spiritual pressure was the same as that of Ukitake's, who had the Soul King's right arm's power. The enormous arm of the Soul King excites Kurotsuchi beyond compare, as he had found a test subject like none other before it. Unaware of the reasons why the Soul King's left arm was serving Ewok, Kurotsuchi gets corrected by the arm, which then speaks and tells him he was named Pernida Parnkyas. Kurotsuchi, being Kurotsuchi, then starts babbling on about naming it or deciding the spelling of its name, which Pernida takes as an insult and attacks him by sending his nerves into the ground below and controlling it like living matter. Kurotsuchi dodges it and tries to get away by ziplining to a nearby building, but gets caught between two hands by Pernida. Around the same time, Bazard and the others get ready to engage the Quincy King in Hashwalth. Kurotsuchi manages to survive unharmed, with only his explosion-reactive motor going out. As he reaches the ground below, riddled with Pernida's nerves, he forms a Hirenkyaku, the aerial Hoho Ishida, and grandfather Suken named so. Kurotsuchi then throws an explosive soul at Pernida's finger. Ripping it off, he quickly pours a preservative on it to keep it fresh for later use. But the finger suddenly gains consciousness as well, and throws its nerves on his right hand. Kurotsuchi immediately realigns the blood vessels, muscles, and nerves in his hand by performing rapid one-hand surgery. Pernida then rips his own finger off, which starts turning into another hand automatically, to strengthen his forces against Kurotsuchi. Having read about the Soul King's left arm while he was young, getting to practically experience it right now really overjoys Kurotsuchi. He then unleashes his Bankai. Ikaku and Yumichika, aware of his highly toxic Bankai, quickly rush over to Kenpachi to get him out of the way, when Kurotsuchi tells them that wasn't the case this time, as he brings out his alternate Bankai, Matai Fukuin Shotai, a variant of Konjiki Ashisogizo, which had the ability to give birth to a new Ashisogijizo based on the current battle data. Covered in 70,000 layers of nerves on its exterior, Pernida has no luck in trying to control Ashisogijizo, as he only manages to peel one layer off at a time. Ashisogijizo then rushes the seemingly helpless Pernida in front of it and starts to spontaneously swallow all three of his arms whole. As Pernida struggles only to get devoured, Kurotsuchi lets out a villainous kind of laugh, now that his victory has been set in stone. Episode 9 starts off with Kurotsuchi stopping in the middle of his evil laugh, as suddenly Pernida starts pouncing around viciously in Ashisogizo's body and bursts out, exploding Ashisogijizo to bits and pieces. Urahara and Kiraku sense this drop in Kurotsuchi's spiritual pressure, although Urahara believes he must be alright since he was Kurotsuchi after all. The drop in the enemy's spiritual pressure was instead more alarming, as they couldn't make out their moves anymore. Not to mention they didn't know much about them to begin with. Barrow looks on from his tower, pitying the helpless Soul Reapers scurrying in front of him, as he says, only a fool or a loser who should be abandoned would disrupt the unity of a group. That's when Kyoraku turns around abruptly to face him, but gets a giant hole put through his abdomen by Barrow, or so it seems when suddenly, Barrow starts hearing Kyoraku's enchantments behind him, as he appears before him and strikes his sniper away. Barrow wonders about how Kyoraku got all the way behind him all of a sudden. Kyoraku at that point asks him if he had never played Bodhidharma, but Barrow had never heard of it before now. Kyoraku then praises Nano for keeping up with him this well, as she reveals herself from her hiding spot. He then asks her to leave since it was dangerous, but she refuses. Although she ends up agreeing to go back to tell the others to go on without them. Before leaving, however, she warns Kyoraku not to die unless he wants her to shave off all his chest hairs off his corpse. Barrow then mentions that the data they had on the Soul Reapers mentioned that Kyoraku Zanpakuto had the ability to turn children's games into reality. Upon which Kyoraku starts explaining the rules to the Bodhidharma Falls Down game, which was that the tagged person, called It, was supposed to be visible to all participating players. If any player gets caught moving by the It, they lose. But if they manage to touch him before that happens, it's their victory. After listening to the rules, Barrow considers it similar to Chocolate Ingles, a similar game in his culture, where the participants could see the It's spiritual pressure and would take the shortest route to them to touch them, whilst leaving a static image of themselves behind so they don't get caught moving. As long as he knew it was just an illusion, victory was certain for him. Barrow says as he tells Kyoraku that telling him the rules was his biggest mistake. Kyoraku, however, thought otherwise, as the game only begins once both participants know the rules. As he explains that the static image earlier was actually a solidified spiritual pressure meant to fool his Reikaku. Barrow refuses to accept he would make a mistake like that, when Kyoraku reminds him he would if his opponent was the head captain of the 13 court guard squads. Meanwhile, as Nanao tells the others to leave without them, Shinji agrees and tells the others to respect the wishes of the head captain as well, since Ukitake would have done the same as well. Kyoraku tries to use the same trick again, but Baro successfully avoids it, marking the first time someone had dodged Kyoraku's Kageoni. Having all of his battle data while he had nothing on them gave Baro a big edge on Kyoraku. Baro then introduces himself as Stern Ritter X, Lil Baro, the X-axis, whose bullets could not be dodged. He then shoots a massive hole through Kyoraku, only for it to be a shadow after-image of his Kaji Okuri that Kyoraku had placed there to fool him. Once the game started, it never ended, and so had been the case with Baro already as Kyoraku sliced his gun in two, although Baro rebuilds it the next second since it was made of his reishi. However, in this instant, Baro had made the fatal mistake of taking his eyes off Kyoraku, which he capitalizes on by swarming him with shadows and landing a piercing blow. But this in turn leads to Baro opening his closed eye for the third time in battle. Granted to him by Iwash, Baro had become immune to any weapon in the world. He then transforms, donning brilliant green wings and new powers. Called Zillial, his transformed state welcomes Kyoraku by putting enormous holes in his body. Surviving thanks to his tenacity, Kyoraku then retaliates using the Kido attack Zangarin. Simultaneously, Nakalavar and Ichigo go at it. His poison does not work on Ichigo because of his past stay at the royal palace, leading to Nakalavar thinking about changing its composition. With the matters getting out of hand, Kyoraku decides to release his Bankai, Katenkyo Katsu Karamatsu Shinju, that immediately covers the entire surroundings in a gold hue and gets felt by everyone in the vicinity as well. Unfazed by it, Baro launches another attack on Kyoraku, but suddenly severe wounds start appearing on his body. This was the work of Kyoraku's Bankai, whose Act 1, Tameraikizi no Wakachiai, brought about the same wounds on both parties. Then comes Act 2, Zanki no Shitone, where the enemy would get an incurable disease, and then Act 3, Danjo no Fuchi, where the enemy throws themselves into deep water to exhaust their spiritual pressure. Baro tries to escape but cannot. Ohana, Kyoraku's Zanpakuto, makes a rare appearance. Unwilling to yield to a Soul Reaper's Bankai, Baro charges Kyoraku, boiling with rage. That's when Kyoraku starts the enchantment of his Bankai's final act, Itokir Basami Chizome no Notobue. Baro's mouth swells, and the next moment his entire upper section bursts like a magnificent golden balloon, and he sinks to the bottom. Kyoraku looks down at him as he sinks, and then takes the same damage himself, although falling down into Ashana's lap makes it all worth it for him. He then begins to say something to her, but the episode ends. Stay connected, like and subscribe for more fun recaps on one and only Endless Recaps.
Last time on Bleach 1000-Year Blood War: The Conflict. A brutal showdown between the head captain of the 13 court guard squads, Kaioyaraku Shunsui and Stern Ritter X, Lil Baro commenced. After narrowly evading Kaioyaraku's Budhid Harma game attacks, Baro transforms into an ascended Quincy state called Zillial, which quickly turns the tables on Kaioyaraku. But Kaioyaraku counters with his deadly Bankai, which progressively deals more and more damage to Baro until eventually his head explodes and the battle is settled. Has Baro finally been defeated? And what is it that Kaioyaraku has to tell Oshana? Stay tuned to find out in Episode 10. Episode 10 starts off with Pernida bursting out of Ashisaja Jizo, blowing it to smithereens. Pernida now has a bow and arrow in his hand, as he once again reminds Kuratsuchi that he was a Quincy. Kuratsuchi, however, mocks him for claiming to be a Quincy despite being the mighty Soul King's left arm. Pernida doesn't appreciate insults on the Quincy name from Kuratsuchi. However, his voice changes in between this. Kuratsuchi picks up on this as well, speculating if that perhaps was because it regained some memories of the Soul King or if it was evolving. Pernida then launches arrows at him. Kuratsuchi dodges it, but it reverses midair, leaving him no time to react. That's when Nimue abruptly appears and grabs the nerve-manipulating arrow with her bare hand, quickly ripping it off and falling towards the ground swarming with Pernida's nerves. Kuratsuchi saves her and starts scolding her for acting on her own despite not being ordered to save him. Ever since Ikugo and the others arrived, Nimue had evolved exponentially, and it would be almost impossible for Kuratsuchi to replicate that within another one of his creations, which is why he orders her not to die unless he asks of her. However, at that time, all Nimue could think of was what he called her the first time she opened her eyes, number 7. Nimue then gives Kuratsuchi a Hajikuzai so he could restore his arm after noticing he had forgotten to pack one. Kuratsuchi then carries out his plan to take out Pernida, which involves him spraying an anesthetic all around that will paralyze Pernida for the time being, although it affects him somewhat as well. But that was a calculated risk. After that, the responsibility was in Nimue's hands. since she was tasked with injecting Pernida with a concoction that would coagulate the blood running through him and kill him. Kuratsuchi clears the path for her by paralyzing the nerves as planned, and Nimue successfully manages to inject Pernida with a shot as well. It starts working, and 2 of Pernida's arms quickly erode. But before he snaps off the connection to them, it reaches him too. He then taunts Kuratsuchi for thinking that was enough to kill him, but does so in an unusual manner, which Kuratsuchi believes was something he picked up from Kenpachi. He concludes that he was able to absorb the abilities of those he controlled and was now too quick for Nimue to react to, although Pernida's attention was on him, not Nimue. In a glimpse of the past, we see a little Nimue asking Aiken why Kuratsuchi had stopped calling her Nimuri number 7. Nimue was the 7th edition of Kuratsuchi's plan to create the first functioning artificial soul. Prior to her, all other models had died very early in their development, with number 6 lasting the longest, which was 2 years. However, Nimue changed that, naming her Nimuri, which means sleep in Japanese. Since you can't dream while being awake, she was the living, breathing dream of Kuratsuchi Mayuri, but she couldn't understand why he wouldn't call her by her original name anymore. How would he, when she was his greatest and dearest creation after all? Nimue, pushing her limits by enhancing her being's powers to just 0.8% before breakdown, leaps towards Kuratsuchi, saving him at the last second from Pernida. He again starts scolding her for acting without clear instructions, but Nimue tells him it was her mission. She then leaves him there to go back and fight Pernida again, determined to defeat him. Kuratsuchi can't help but be impressed by her as she sacrifices 6% of her soul to fire a devastating Jiken Jurinju at Pernida, obliterating him in the process. As she falls after her exhausting attack, Pernida suddenly impales her entire body with nerves, spontaneously blasting her to bits immediately. Watching his best creation expire in front of his eyes sends Kuratsuchi into a state he hadn't experienced before. A subconsciously created Shale Aparo then appears, calling Kuratsuchi out for feeling dejected now all of a sudden when his imperfect creation had died. Claiming failure was just a means to improve even further, Shale Aparo throws Kuratsuchi's words back at him since he was starting to think that Nimue was perfect despite her imperfections. This little roast session helps Kuratsuchi to open his eyes and get his focus back. He then lets Pernida devour everything left of Nimue, taking just her cerebrum back. What follows is sudden, spontaneous, uncontrollable growth within Pernida, leading towards his gruesome demise. Kuratsuchi had implanted a growth-accelerating organ in Nimue's brain, which facilitated uncontrolled growth that could only be sustained by the cerebrum. With that connection now lost, Pernida could not control that rapid growth and exploded. Kuratsuchi then collapses after one stray nerve had gotten his leg. Ikaku and Yumichika appear and take him to the capsules where Hitsugeya and Matsumoto were recovering. The two then place him in one of the pods and Kenpachi in the other and express their deepest gratitude to Kuratsuchi for saving their captain's life. By creating an ever-evolving artificial soul, Kuratsuchi believed he had finally surpassed Urahara. Meanwhile, at the Quincy stronghold, the estranged Quincy's launch their attack against Iwatch's guards, but quickly realize that it wouldn't be as simple as they thought. As Hashwolf is sending some of his guards to keep an eye on Ishida, they get taken out by Bazard, who tells him he should be more concerned about how he was still alive instead. Episode 11 starts off with a peek into Kaoiraku's past, where we see him at his brother's house. His brother's wife gives his brother one of her hairpins, so he would always be reminded of her whenever he's far away as well, making him blush. Kaoiraku can't control his smile over this drastic change in his brother, which he credits his wife for. Presently, as he's trying to tell Ohana something, a beam of destructive green light suddenly bursts through his abdomen. Boro then turns up again, still alive despite having his head blown off. He then changes his appearance into an owl-like creature, while his wings turn a lustrous gold. Proclaiming no mere Soul Reaper's Bankai was worthy of slaying him, Baro announces he will punish sinners who dared to get in his way as he unleashes the destructive power of the Light of Judgment. Kaoiraku somehow manages to escape from its devastation despite the gaping wound in his stomach. His organs fried and having lost tons of blood, Kaoiraku starts slipping out of consciousness. Suddenly, he hears his sister-in-law's voice asking him to wake up. It turns out to be Nanao, who then asks him to forget about the promise he had made to her mother in the past and hand over her Zanpakuto. Baro spots them, but Kaoyuraku blinds him by calling forth Okayo. He then tells her he will return her Zanpakuto to her. This confuses Nanao, who starts wondering if Okayo was her Zanpakuto. Simultaneously, Baro inflates his head into a flattened sphere and figures out that they were hiding in his shadow using Keijoni. Baro lights up the area, eradicating the shadow to force them out, and Nanao slips out, holding a concealed sword. At the request of her mother, Kaoyuraku had Ohana give birth to Okayo so she could hide her Zanpakuto. Nanao inquires why her mother asked him such a thing, upon which Kaoyuraku gives her a little history lesson on the Ai's family. Nanao's heritage. In the Ai's family, for some unknown reason, which was thought to be a curse, the men always seemed to die at an early age. Nanao's mother had left her family to escape that fate and had married Kaoyuraku's older brother. She had really changed his brother, resulting in Kaoyuraku spending more time at his place. Unfortunately, his brother also became ill and died some time later, and Nanao's mother was forced to return back to her family, as such was noble family tradition. Before leaving, she had entrusted Kaoyuraku to hide the sword away, so she could at least protect Nanao from it. Kaoyuraku thus had Okayo hide it. Nanao asks him to give the sword to her, demonstrating her conviction and taking comfort in the fact that she had her captain by her side too. The Ai's family were priests, with only the head possessing a Zanpakuto that was passed down generations. Although it had no blade, this particular Zanpakuto, called Shinken Hakaioken, had the ability to confront gods and reflect their powers, which is the same reason why Baro was unable to see anything in the sword's immediate vicinity, as it was reflecting his bright godly light back at him. Nanao had seen Kaoyuraku at the academy wearing similar kimonos as her mother, but the hairpin was a dead giveaway of her late mother's. Unable to wield a Zanpakuto, Nanao had decided to go for the Kaido Corps because she had affinity for it, but somehow still ended in Squad 8, which was being led by Kaoyuraku. That's when she realized he was the man who made that promise to her mother. Nanao charges Baro with her new weapon, confident that no weapon could hurt him. Baro lets her have a clean go at him, but Nanao only manages to cut his hand. Baro realizes quickly this was no ordinary weapon and starts preparing an all-out attack to finish things. While being deflected after her initial attack, Nanao had suffered cuts on both her legs, which were starting to bleed profusely now, putting her through unbearable pain. The pain and fear of facing off against a deity-like being was about to get the better of her when Kaoyuraku appeared behind her all of a sudden and placed his hand on her sword, easing her stress. Kaoyuraku, who had been entrusted with Nanao by his late brother and his sister-in-law, had come to support her one more time. Baro notices Kaoyuraku and calls him a coward for shielding himself behind his subordinate. Kaoyuraku tells Nanao that he had her back, as he always had in the past too, giving her the strength she needed now to face Baro. Baro unleashes his devastating trumpet on them, but finds himself sliced in half right away. It was the power of the Shinken Hakioken that reflected his own attack back at him. Baro bursts into brilliant gold dust, with his death a certainty this time. Nanao slips off her own blood, but thankfully Kaoyuraku catches her and praises her for a job well done. He then tells her they should head back and regroup, but can barely walk a couple of his steps before collapsing himself, which leads to him deciding to rejoin after they've rested a bit first. Last time on Bleach, 1000-Year Blood War. Rupturing a hole through Kaoyuraku's abdomen, Baro is back again. After sustaining multiple fatal injuries, Kaoyuraku starts slipping into unconsciousness, but luckily Nanao makes it in time. Using the bladeless Shinken Hakioken, a Zanpakuto passed down in her family with the ability to fight gods by reflecting their powers, Nanao faces Baro. His devastating final attack ends up striking him down instead as Nanao, with Kaoyuraku's support, reflects it back at him, sealing his fate. With 2 Stern Ritters gone, is hope still alive for the Soul Rippers? Stay tuned to find out. Episode 12 kicks off with a blast from the past. A young, frail Hashwolf meets a young, fiery Bazbee for the first time ever. Presently, the two face off with tensions high as Hashwolf asks Bazbee if his injuries were a result of Uwatch's Oswalin. Oswalin, which he had performed on his troops, had ended up killing everyone it didn't select, except for a few exceptions like Bazbee. Hashwolf apologizes to him for not knowing this would happen, but Baz B snaps at him for feigning ignorance on the matter, as though he didn't know this would happen all along. The two had known each other for quite some time, and Baz B then tells Hashwolf to call him by what he used to call him, Baz, while he also takes Hashwolf's old nickname he had for him, Jugo. Baz B then activates his burning finger and tells Hashwolf that he knew soon he would swap places with Uwatch when he fell asleep, and so he was going to kill Uwatch's powers alongside him once and for all as the two engaged in a blazing duel. The day the two met for the first time, Hashwolf lacked any self-esteem since he couldn't make weapons from Ryze like Baz B or the others. Baz B then tries reassuring Hashwolf in his own way by telling him he, Baz B, was just a genius, and even the others weren't able to keep up with him as well, so he shouldn't let himself get down over it too much. Baz B then gives Hashwolf the nickname Jugo, which he doesn't like, and asks him to stop calling him that. During their conversation, Hashwolf reveals he had no family except his uncle. Baz B then rips a button from his jacket and throws it at Hashwolf's feet, declaring him his underling from that day onward and promising to help him become the strongest Quincy alongside him. As the two old acquaintances face each other, now as enemies, a flashback to Baz B's past shows us the devastation Uwatch and his forces had caused them. Baz B's entire village had been wiped out, leaving no one alive besides him, while Hashwolf's uncle also got killed in the fires they spread around. From that day onward, the two young men had vowed to train and get close to Uwatch someday, with the aim of killing him. Time passed, but Hashwolf still couldn't make Ryze weapons. However, that didn't stop Baz B from continuously encouraging his friend. Uwatch, who had conquered all the territories of the Quincy country of Light Reich, tells his general, Sadoltz, that they needed to assemble an elite combat unit now, one that could help him defeat the Soul Society. The name of this elite unit would be known as the Stern Ritter. Over the span of the next 5 years, Baz B and Hashwolf continued their tireless training every day and night to become stronger. Thanks to his immense latent talent, Baz B was showing tremendous growth and still had plenty of room to keep growing. However, it was a different story with Hashwolf, who even after 5 years of trying was unable to create a bow or, better yet, collect Rishi like other Quincies. Baz B had heard of cases like him, where one person would be born with absolutely no latent abilities and would be deemed useless, eventually being weeded out. However, these were legends, and none had been born in many hundreds of years. Baz B started to think if having Hashwolf tag along with him would hinder him in any capacity. But after seeing him train his sword skills every day without rest, Baz B just couldn't bring himself to leave him behind. Then came the day that changed everything. Uwatch's forces announced the building of the elite combat unit Stern Ritter. Baz B and Hashwolf follow them and go up to the commanding officer. Baz B then tells him boldly to let them recruit into the Stern Ritter. However, the pretentious officer shrugs him off and tells him they'll be notified when recruitment begins. As he's leaving, Baz B shoots an arrow in his path, forcing him to stop and openly challenges him to a fight for his position. The officer takes up his challenge and quickly rushes over to where he was, but before they can fight, everyone, including Baz B, collapses to the ground. It was Uwatch's spiritual pressure. He announces he has found the right-hand man he was looking for. Thinking it was him he was talking about, Baz B gets excited that all of his efforts were finally about to bear fruit, but is left utterly shocked when Uwatch actually goes up to Hashwolf instead. Uwatch then asks him to become his advisor, leaving his own subordinates stunned. After training for so long, Baz B had imagined both of them being in the position Hashwolf was in right now, or, at the very least, the one who actually had talent, in other words, himself. As he gets frustrated over not being the chosen one, Hashwolf tells Uwatch that he must have made some kind of mistake, as he had no talent and couldn't even make a single bow. He suggests Uwatch take Baz B instead, who actually did have talent. Uwatch clears Hashwolf's misunderstanding by telling him the two of them had unique powers, where they couldn't have them but instead could give others powers, let them grow, and then take them back. Uwatch explains that the real reason why Baz B was able to show so much potential was because he had been in Hashwolf's company all this time. Thanks to Hashwolf, a talentless nobody like him was also at the level of a genius. Uwatch then places his hand on Hashwolf's head, telling him to come with him since he needed him, making him feel wanted for the first time ever. Suddenly, Baz B goes berserk and shoots an arrow straight at Uwatch. In a shocking turn of event, however, the one who ends up blocking it is none other than Hashwolf himself, who had promised to kill Uwatch alongside Baz B. The scene transitions into the present, where Hashwolf tries telling Bazby to stop fighting as it doesn't benefit the king. Bazby, who was there to actually kill that same king, activates his burner finger for attack. Hashwolf leaps back to try and avoid further fighting, but Bazby invites him to it. We then see a scene 3 years after Hashwolf got recruited by Uwatch. By then, Bazby had managed to get into the Stern Ritter as well and kept trying to fight Hashwolf, who would refuse to engage since they were forbidden to fight amongst each other, with the penalty being death. Lieutenant Commander Hubert offers to fix Bazby in Hashwolf's place, but he still doesn't allow it, as even though Ihwok wasn't there to see it happening, he, the commanding officer, was, and he wasn't about to let anyone defile his lord's orders. In just 3 years he had become the commander of the entire Sternritters, but refused to fight Bazby. In the present, things had changed, as Bazby leaps at Hashwolf and attacks him. Hashwolf counters by slicing his arm off, letting off his final attack. Burning full fingers doesn't prove helpful to Bazby either, as Hashwolf settles their clash with a decisive swing. Bazby slowly walks up to him, while bleeding profusely, grabs his jacket, and tells Hashwolf he thought losing to him would be far worse, while smiling, and finally collapses. Voices of their time together echo through Bazby's head one last time and fade away forever, while Hashwolf sheaths his sword and calmly walks back to his post.